When we're thinking about this class, this conversation, this experience, we were sort of talking amongst ourselves, and Cleo was offering melodrama as a great place to step into sort of the style of work that we do, which is a lot of our work comes from the body in motion in space, and that the body is the source of a lot of the work that we do. And melodrama, when in the way that we talk about it, we're sort of talking about like classical melodrama. So the three archetypes that sort of are within melodrama are hero, villain, and victim. And you'll see those sort of play out in all of the melodramas. And they all have a very similar way in which the plot unfolds, that it's, if you think of like, any cartoon you've ever watched, any kid's cartoon, they play out in the sense where you have the problem, it gets really a lot worse, and then right before the end, it seems like, oh my gosh, the villain's gonna win, and then boom, the hero saves the whatever it is in the nick of time, and we all go, yeah, oh my gosh, So that's like the basic structure of how melodrama works. But there's some physical tenets that we also take into consideration. Cleo, I don't know if you want to talk about some of that stuff, if you want to piggyback in at any point.
Yeah. So one of the big physical aspects of melodrama is what we call truth in size. So melodrama is a very emotional form, and in many different styles of acting techniques, there are different ways that actors connect to their characters, right? Different ways that we can put ourselves in this character's feet or shoes, or even feel the emotions that we're supposed to be feeling. Well, in melodrama, it's all grand gesture. So the emotions that we feel, they're not necessarily realism, right? We don't have to feel sadness and be small and sad. We can feel sadness at a level of 10 that takes it to despair, right? So the way that melodrama gets us in is that we're constantly using our bodies. And something that I appreciate from melodrama techniques is that we're not being asked as actors to put ourselves in a dark place, right? In things like Stanislavski, you're asked to have memory recall, where you're supposed to remember something that takes you to a sad place. And that honestly is not always a great technique for all actors. Some actors thrive on it. People like me do not. So with melodrama, Evan also says no. Look at that face. So with melodrama, you have the opportunity to make a shape with your body, to take space, to kind of embody this emotion and bring it from the outside in. And when that happens, things are much more accessible. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Evan looks like yes.
My hand gets close to the screen, it means I'm going to unmute. Yeah, I wanted to piggyback off what you're saying about, I think you're pointing at a difference that we have in technique of maybe other actors and other acting, which is that we, especially when we're doing something like melodrama, which involves despair, not an emotion I as an actor want to experience 8 days a week in my, because that's our job to perform that much. And so by finding truth in size, we can start making this technique that allows us to literally craft the images that make the audience feel a certain way. And it's like and I guess that's a really, really important word, image. I think that we work from that a lot, that when we're aiming to make true but large images and large stories like a melodrama is on stage, that we employ images, we look through, whether it's going and looking through old melodramas, or going and like saying to ourselves, I'm going to use the image of a river to help me craft my body and understand the emotions that this character is feeling in this moment. And in that way, and that might sound a little esoteric, but in that way, I can not have to just try and be in despair so that you all can see the story. I can just craft my body into the shapes that we all also, as audience members and actors, connect to those images, connect to those, to whatever might be happening in a melodramatic story. And it keeps me safe. It stops me from losing my mind. I get to enjoy acting. And maybe that's just my opinion about how I think a lot of Stanislav's technique works. And I'll just stop talking about that because that's not what we came here to hear.
You know, it's also something, one of the trainings that we get is that we also work a lot with masks, literal masks, like a piece of thing you put on your face. And the way in which we work with that, both as a literal object and as a metaphor, is that there is something that you play through. It's not you. It's you place a mask on, and then you create the spirit that invests that experience. And so while you can have a literal piece of something on your face, you can also play through the mask of what the character is. So let's say that, if my character is, a mass murderer, I don't need to go through the reality of what that takes, but I can play the mask. And at the end of the show, I take the mask off and I'm me again. I get to have my life still exist. And so sometimes, I think if we're talking about like initial acting concepts, I think sometimes maybe a stereotype and or like maybe an implicit expectation that comes with acting is that these, that actors have to dive into it. You gotta really become the Joker if you're gonna do it. You gotta terrorize your castmates. You gotta be a real jerk. It's like it's the skill, the art is not how you literally become something else. It's how you can step into that space and then come back out of it safely. And so the journey that comes on both ends, maintaining your sanity, is a really important aspect of work. Some people will come to this and it'll become a therapy for yourself. And personally, I think that that's like not the vibe. We're not here to see someone process their emotions. We're here to see someone show us a thing, and then we get to have our own emotions. That's the thrill of going to the theater, is that you see something and it affects you. But if the glass is broken where you are worried for the human being on stage, the magic is broken. And it doesn't, it's the same thing that happens if you were to watch a stage combat fight, to go on a very technical realm. If you see the actors get hurt, the magic of the fight leaves the stage. But when you see two really incredible artists going like ping, 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 whoa, and you're like, whoa, like that's so cool. And you are then pulled into the narrative, pulled into the experience. And that's, I think, the goal at the very base level, is that we as theater makers are attempting to reach someone and have an effect and affect our audience. And how that's part of our thinking, is how does our work affect our audience?
And something to say also about these physical masks. Physical masks are what we call things that are not, a piece of something on your face, a body mask, a physical mask, that these also give the audience a little bit of separation to feel what they have to feel. Yeah. So in melodrama, when we're using grand gesture, when we're having so much size, it lifts the entire story into a poetic realm. And we speak about this often as physical theater artists, when it lifts into the poetic. And what that means is it becomes something grander than reality. And by doing that, not only, as everyone is saying, is it better for the actor, but it actually allows this beautiful transcendent aspect of true like magic on stage, right? We can see something and we can say, I will never see that in my real life. And there's something that audiences can connect to in that. And specifically in melodrama, right? As Jesse kind of took us through the structure, there's the villain, there's the victim, there's the hero. And we, as the audience, we absolutely know who is who. Sometimes there are subversions and those are exciting, but we want to see the hero win. We want to see the victim be okay. And if it's too literal, then we're uncomfortable and we can't invest in the story. Because if the villain is actually a villain, then we can't watch, we shut down, right? So even in these stereotypes, We have to lift into the poetic. We have to allow the space to have the audience be with us rather than against us. Because if you're too into it, if you're diving too far into, torture, into
or even just your own
your own
emotional world
feelings,
as opposed to, yeah.
Yeah, that also,
Mm.
then the audience doesn't want to be there anymore. Right. So there's this really fine line of feeling things while also letting yourself not feel things.
Yeah. I can sort of piggyback off of that because that makes me think it's a good time to sort of share the more maybe the more technical stuff that or some of the things that I think of in terms of technical stuff that help me, and I think us, because we have had similar training, the three of us, do this work. So when we're talking about making these big images and making things that like dealing with in, let's say for melodrama, like I go back to despair. In our studying of physical theater, we learned from a lot of different teachers, actually in person, and also those teachers learning from a lot of different traditions of theater. And one of them that comes to mind is Laban. I don't know, dancers, probably
Yeah.
about Laban,
Yeah.
Laban. I say it.
Yeah.
What was that? Someone
It is Laban.
Yes.
Laban. Yes, I'm here like, yes. That we can even, so if I'm doing despair, I might start with an image. And that might be an image of a person to go, okay, a person in despair. I might then superimpose an image from nature on that, because for me, that's a great place to go into it with. Like, I don't have to try and be this picture of a woman that is in despair, which does happen in the world, but I can relate that to an image of a wave. I might take then looking at the way my body moves and say, okay, is this a held state? Is this a flowing state? Is this and then XYZ, there's many different, there's other of those words that like I have written somewhere that I have to go back to. They don't come off my head. Yeah, like bound, flow,
free.
And free.
Yeah.
And obviously it takes a little study. Like we have this study, years of studying what bound movement and free flowing movement mean. But to say that for now, at this moment as an actor in my process, it's not about going and trying to summon up the feeling of despair. I can actually release myself from that responsibility and maybe witness it, because it does happen. It's not as if we're imitating the real world as theater makers, but then breaking it down and finding things that that aren't specifically related to it, that will access my emotions, moving like a wave, finding bound and unbound flow, that can summon up emotions, because we know as human beings that we can be crying because we smelled something. So I guess I'm kind of playing that game of scaffolding the techniques that I've learned, but also overlaying images and finding ways that I can craft my body and not necessarily my emotions, because like despair adjacent. Yes, Tucker, that like, what is this? What is the shape this person in despair is in? Are they like this? Well, maybe I'll put my body in that shape and see what it feels like, and then go back to Laban and say, do I make this bound or unbound? How can I shift or change this shape that my body is in? And then use friends and colleagues and directors and what have you, people watching from the outside, that then say, yeah, that tracks for me, or I feel that makes me feel this way. Yeah, I think adjacent is a really, really great term that like a lot of the times, especially when we're dealing with really big things, because there's also like the tragedy genre, which is related to melodrama, that like we have to find something adjacent to hold on to and understand and embody, that will actually make that moment of magic happen between myself and the audience. I don't need to feel despair. The audience doesn't need to feel despair, but between us, between what the audience sees and what I do, we want to know what we're talking about, and that in that case is about despair. So yeah.
Can I answer Sean's question? Yeah, I would like to answer Sean's question.
I'm
here
sorry,
about
I didn't see questions. Yeah, do it.
Oh, we just got one in the chat. You were doing great. No notes, great. Evan. You're doing great. 10,000 points. Sean, thanks for your question. I think about this question all the time of how do you translate this something else. And I've got a couple of thoughts on this because literally it's what I talk about all the time. So there's two sort of ways I think about it. The first one is what about a particular medium of art making makes it that form? So what about a novel makes it a novel? What about a movie makes it a movie? What about a theater performance makes it a theater performance? And what is unique and specifically those things? So an example would be, the cool thing about a novel is that you get to be inside of the character's head, right? That's the thing that a novel can do that kind of no real other medium can do. I mean, maybe you could do it in a movie with a voiceover, but like it's kind of lame. But it's possible. It's a little bit of bleed, right? You know, what's really cool about movies is that you've got CGI and you've got that it's a recorded medium, so you can edit it. So it's not within the live sphere. So you've got something that can be crafted in a really specific form, and then it is presented in a box, right? So there's no, you know, you can play with what the realities of that box mean. And this can be expanded out to all artistry forms. You know, what is it that's special and or unique about why do it that way? So if I've got an idea for a show, right? I've got an idea for a show. It's going to be, you know, eight monkeys who write Shakespeare inadvertently, right? Because they're in the room for forever. That's my idea for a show. I just came up with it. And I can think to myself, well, all right, as a movie, why do it as a movie? You know, why would I have this idea in a movie form? Well, because I can CGI the monkeys. There you go. Perfect. That's why I should do it as a movie. Why would I do it as theater? Well, I could do it as theater because it's live. So I could have people in monkey suits and maybe they play it so well that we are, for one moment, our minds are eclipsed and we think, wow, we're in the living presence of some monkeys writing Shakespeare. Whoa, that's slick. So then we get to this thing, which is the other half of the question, right? Which is the thing that you're asking, which is how do we translate one form to another? And my personal opinion is that it's hard. It's hard to do that. And they don't necessarily work, right? So the thing that makes live theater amazing and beautiful is that it's live and you are in the living presence. And the thing that we love about theater, and the thing that us specifically love about theater, is that it is live and we can make stuff up. So when we make our work, this is something that we do in our ensembles, all of our work, we write, direct, choreograph, perform. All of it is original work that's collectively made and then presented. And most of the stuff, we create characters that live so thoroughly that they exist live. So we will have points of our pieces that we have a plot point here and a plot point here, and we don't know how we're going to get to the next one, but the characters will handle it, no big deal. So the thing that's exciting about being within a live stage is that you get to have that experience. So how do you translate that to radio and TV? How do you translate that experience of the living living body in space? Can you? And I don't know if that's true. All the stuff I've seen is kind of like, nah, I don't know. Maybe, sort of. People are trying to figure it out. I've seen some effective stuff. My real answer to that question would be, I would not make it the thing that it was. So if you're going to take something that was live theater and you're going to translate it to a new form, you have to understand that what you're doing is you're translating it to a new form. So you should take advantage of what the new form has to offer, as opposed to wishing it actually was theater and you just recorded it and threw it up online anyway, and you're going to ignore the reality that is that you have to switch medium. And if you, that's my basic answer. Cleo, I feel like you're about to say that.
I feel similarly. I mean, when you know, Jesse was saying, well, how do you do this? My answer was immediately, you don't. You know, each form is its own form for a reason. And you know, when you think about, if any of you have watched recordings of the National Theatre London, right? They've been putting up recordings of their shows all of COVID. Or for those of you who have seen Hamilton on Disney Plus, right? It is a live show, but when we look at those, they are filmed like movies. There are close-ups, there are wide shots, there are things that trace little bits of movement, right? And they're doing exactly what Jesse's saying. They're translating. They're not doing a wide shot of the show and saying, here's the show. Because when that happens, we as an audience have no interest. We have no idea where our eye is supposed to be. We have no idea what the actual colors of the costumes are, because now we're looking through a camera. So, you know, light is changed, color is changed. So in order to honor an original piece of art in a new form, you have to change it a little bit. And if you don't change the art itself, you do change the lens in which we see it. Right. So I don't know. I think, go ahead, Evan.
I was going to piggyback off the word lens. In this moment, we have a mediator. I mean, the mediator is not a person. It is the lens. That there's a lens in between us, and that's what makes this form Zoom its own form, because it's a mix between it's live, but it's not in person. And then I would go to a little bit of a woo-woo place, but I live in Northern California. I've been here 5 years, so I have no more shame about doing that. When you are with people, when you are in a theater full of people, this is studied actually, so it's not, I don't know if it's woo, I don't care.
It's not
it's
woo-woo.
been studied that, yeah, it's studied that your heart rates sync up when you're watching a theater performance that you're all interested in. That's a human thing. Our heart rates sync up when we're together and interested in a thing. Hold on, I'm gonna look at this. Oh, okay, you're writing it. Sorry. Okay. And so you can't, I mean, our heart rates might sync up as we watch a movie from faraway places, but we won't feel the effects of that, because I think that humans also give off energy, and we can sense each other's emotions and all these sort of subtle things that we may not realize are happening. That's all part of a live performance. So if we're watching a melodrama, part of the emotional context of that melodrama is going to be summoned up by all of the audience feeling those emotions. The actors will make the shapes, and those shapes will give birth for the audience to emotions, and they'll all feel those together. And that's the magic. And that's why people see live theater and then they riot. And they don't necessarily see things on television. Well, that's not true. Plenty of people riot and see things on television. But like, it's that magic of I'm just want to check the chat, but I'm not running over. Yeah, that there's there's magic in a live performance, and that comes from our hearts beating together and us feeling each other's energy. And you're just not going to have that the same way. It's a different form that Zoom theater, you're going to affect people's emotions, absolutely, but you don't have the collective feeling together. That really does do a lot. I'm almost realizing this now as I say it. So yeah, you got to transform to a different medium.
I was also going to say there's also I think there's something that maybe you don't consciously recognize within something that's live or that you're there for, which is that it's happening. And I think we all know that there's like risk and danger in that the thing may not occur the way that it's intended to. And that's the fun, is that it may be something that no one expected because it's happening right now, right here. And anything could happen. Whereas on a recorded medium, I think internally know it's recorded. When you're watching something that's already recorded, you can sit back, you can pause it, you can go get a snack, you can answer that phone call. You can go, you're like, oh man, this sucks. I'm done. And it's like, that's a whole nother relationship to the reality of being in a theater. And if you don't like it, you have to have the bravery to stand up and risk everyone seeing you. And where does that put you? How does that interaction exist, right? So there's a whole nother realm of being alive that happens within the live form versus something that's behind a screen that you are separated from and that you have no relationship to. In the same way that Evan's saying about the heartbeat of the breath, it's like these things matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was gonna piggyback off of Evan for a second and say that yes, our heartbeats sync up, our breath syncs up, but also, as we all know from our own human lives, emotions are contagious, right? Yeah. So when I watch PBS's recording of, I forget what show it was, super funny, great show. I laughed sitting in my bedroom alone. But could you imagine what it felt like to laugh as a group? Could you imagine what it felt like to be overtaken by that moment rather than my little chuckle that happens by myself? Mm-hmm. Right? And there's actually more studies that have shown that we try to get people to sit close together, because when we're sitting shoulder to shoulder with someone and someone else laughs, even if I didn't think that moment was funny, I'm now laughing.
You left too.
And the same thing happens with crying, right? When something happens and someone really lets themselves come into that moment, other people follow. And you don't get that. I mean, you get that maybe if you're watching a movie with others, you do get a little bit of that. But how many times can we watch that movie and do we cry every time? Sometimes some movies have that power, but most movies don't. And a live theater piece, you can see it a million times and it's going to be different every time. Just like Jesse was saying, you never know. I mean, that's why the circus is so exciting. It's high intensity stunts that could go wrong at any moment.
And when you watch it on film, when you watch, you know, Batman and you see, you know, Robin doing the thing where he flies between the stuff and you're like, cool. Like, it's almost a moment you don't think about, right? But in live in person, you're going, oh my gosh, that person's flying through the air, and that's enough, you know. And it's context and what the medium has to offer you, you know, and our level of attachment. Yeah, go ahead. Please give us questions.
I just wanted to bring up this. It brings a memory of I was sitting in a cafe with a friend, and we were watching. They were showing Harold Lloyd, you know, old Harold Lloyd, silent. You know, Harold Lloyd was incredible. He would do these things where he would fall, catch himself from a multi-story building, and do these very dangerous and amazing stunts that were, you know, for the day, and I still think they're unparalleled. And my Swiss friend was watching him and saying, "Oh, that's," and I say, "Well, you know, he was really doing this. The moment I told him, he was doing this live, and you know, he had a malformed hand, he was missing fingers, and he's catching himself with like 3 fingers on one hand. And the moment he did that, and the next time he slipped, my friend just jumped. He kicked over the table. He was so, when he realized, he made that connection that this guy's really doing this. This isn't some, you know, it wasn't done on a stage. It wasn't. And so breaking that barrier of, what should we call it? You know, convincing your audience that what's happening, even for a moment, is, well, I guess, I mean, that's the point, right? That's what we're trying to get to. And if you can achieve that through, and again, right, I really agree with that whole thing about the medium must change. You must adapt according to things. It's very easy to try to the idea of trying to force something, some other form into a new form and squeeze it in and force it to work is I immediately thought of, you know, when you try and pass off non-meat as meat in a, you know, I know, no matter what you want to do, but and coming from a traditional music background and dance background, there's a lot of debate about this. There's a lot of debate about, well, in the old days, they didn't have saxophones. Why are we listening to this tune and it's being played by saxophone? In the old days, we would have played it on a bagpipe in, you know, some Bulgarian tune. And my answer to that is, that's what they're playing now. Not everybody has. You've got a lot of people playing saxophones. They've taken these traditional melodies, they're playing them. They may be ornamenting them. They're going to make them sound Bulgarian. They're going to make them sound Macedonian, but they're not. It's not going to sound like a bagpipe because it's not a bagpipe. So they're using saxophones, and it is this concept of, well, in my world, there's a lot of conflict between the concept of what is authentic and traditional and real, even though from a sort of anthropological, sociological point of view, you know, everything is real. It's new. It's happening now. The only difference is chronology. The only difference is when it was done on the calendar. You can say, oh yeah, well, this is traditional. Well, yeah, but it was new in 1903, you know, they were complaining about it then. They were saying, what is this new crap that they're doing? These, oh, we changed the century and now you're trying to disrupt our old traditions. And all the traditions, they're all just there chronologically. You can respect them. You can say, this is what we like to do in 1902. But not to say it is the same, and not to say that it's better. I'm sorry, I got off
it's really
on
funny. It's funny that you bring up these the silent film stars and traditions, right? Because it's like all the silent film stars are mostly vaudeville. They're old vaudeville like chants, right? And vaudeville is pretty much what we do. You know, what the other stuff we're talking about melodrama right now, but like the shows that we just did, we just put up a clown show and a red light cabaret at the Botawat Festival, for the summer festival at Dell'Arte. And the thing that's really interesting about the vaudevillian form is that it's about the physical body in space in relationship to what's occurring live, right? So when you watch the film and you see them do these incredible things with their bodies, your heart gets caught in the same way that gets caught if you were seeing that kind of stuff live within those different things, because that is a recording of that live medium, and you're seeing the skill and artistry of these performers within this tradition. And that's the thing that I think is trying to be salvaged, maintained, kept, that tradition alive. I think it's pretty exciting. You can read what this little comment is.
I think also, just to echo what Jesse's saying, is that with these vaudevillian performers, it is about relationship to space and what's actually happening on stage, but it's also relationship to audience. And so these performers that we see are performing as they're masters. So they're performing as though there's audience and there isn't. And so we get the benefit of that audience relationship because they are so good, right? And that if they didn't have all of the training and skill and experience behind them, we would not feel the way we do when we watch those recordings. But that, they were able, because they are masters, to take that skill and transfer it, which is kind of magical also.
And at the time and continually, and from that time, film was developing. Like, if you look back at a lot of older film, especially like the acting style, like, is going to be very different than what you see today, because they're all they knew. I mean, they weren't having a terribly different experience from what we as theater practitioners are now having to do with Zoom, which was, oh, there's a new form. We're going to walk into it with theater and vaudeville because that's all that anyone's ever done. But then as they go, the director, who now, I mean, many people would say that film is a director's art. Actors are fantastic and masterful, but that the directors and cinematographers slowly start to realize what they have to do to fill in the gaps that come from having a lens in between you and the performer, which I think is kind of what we're talking about with this question of how do we get Zoom theater to be a thing? How do we get this internet theater to be a thing? And my instinct does say we transform into a film place if we want to do that, because it's film. And because the director needs to inform the audience somehow that when he's falling off these buildings and grabbing himself, that there's a real risk, which I would get if I saw you in person, and I intellectually get when I see it on the screen. But the director can do things to deepen that, to make it even more, oh, this is, and maybe that's a shot from the top of the building. I don't really know, because I'm not a film director. But yeah, an understanding that it's a different medium and we have to do different things to connect the audience and to have people understand the situations, the risks, the effort that it takes of the performer, because those are the things we're appreciating, that when we see them in person, we don't do the same work to see, you just know that it's dangerous if someone's falling off a building right in front of you, but you might need some other scaffolding. You might need some other imagery and some other stuff to have that similar emotional, physiological reaction when you're watching it on a screen, right? It's not the same deal. Even if it's just your friend leaning over and going, he was just doing this and he only has 3 fingers, you know? It can be as simple as that, but it is a different thing. And it is, there's different demands that a film.
Yes, Izzy.
I was just going to say that this past quarantine year, I have done 2 Zoom productions in theater with murder mysteries, comedies, that type of thing. And it is so unbelievably difficult to try to make that genuine human connection when the other people that you're acting alongside with have internet problems, or they're glitching in and out of the frame, or their dog runs in and starts barking behind them. And it is so unbelievably hard. You as an actor are trying to put yourself into a different place entirely when you have other people who have problems, or you have your own issues and it goes wrong and it doesn't feel right anymore. And like, no matter how many costumes you put on, how good your internet connection is, it's still you looking at a screen and hoping that nothing goes wrong in the back of your head while being somebody else with their own problems existing in the story. So when we did Clue, for example, we had a lot of physical comedy written into the script, which we could not do in our tiny boxes. So what we had to do was either cut that out entirely or make some noise to indicate that that was happening and be like, oh my God, the table just flipped over. Oh my God, you just dropped a lamp on that head. How did you do that? It's so difficult to do. And then when you look at the final product, you're like, that's not as good as it could have been. So it's almost impossible from my experience to do a genuinely good theater production in a Zoom box, because you no longer have that option of physically portraying things. You have to either make the sound or tell people what is happening, and that's not as interesting. It's just not.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say I've directed a few Zoom pieces as well, and it's just that we can't look at it like it's live theater, and that's really what it is. And when you're comparing, then of course you're going to have those feelings that are like, it's so bad, it's not the same, it's right, it's never going to be good, it's never going to be the same. But that's not the point, is really what the key is. And you know, when I directed these Zoom pieces, it was extremely challenging. And it is extremely challenging because the approach that I took was that no one was looking at their screen. So if I am going to be directing this piece, I'm having a conversation with someone here. And then the other person in the other screen is having a conversation with someone here. And for the viewer, it actually comes together like a real conversation. But for those actors, it's extremely difficult because they have no idea what other cues the person is giving them. They are completely dependent. It is like the Brady Bunch, yes. They're completely dependent on either a cue from me, the director, or vocal cues, or what we actually did, which worked really well, was we kind of choreographed things like timing wise. So people knew that after someone said the last word, they had 3 seconds, and then they turned around, and then the other person reached their hand out, and then, right? So it's just that you have to approach differently. You know, when I approached these shows, there was zero attempt of making this like live theater. It was all, how do we use this platform to make it look like they're in the same room? And that was the goal, and that was the question, and that's all we focused on. And then the piece really came together. I think Sean had a hand up first, and then Tucker had a hand up. So Sean.
Well, thanks, Cleo. I hope that sounds like something that might be shareable to TV audiences as well. So please consider sharing that if you think it's appropriate. It sounds
Sure.
Really awesome. I just wanted to give a shout out to Dell'Arte in general and the notion of adaptive storytelling, and just praise you for the conversation and what performing artists have had to do through the pandemic as a sort of meta improvisation of some kind. But I put in the note something about location-based performance art. And, you know, one of the things that first impressed me when I moved up here was going to the festival at Dell'Arte and the, you know, the parade and using the town as the set. You know, we didn't, the theater, what, you didn't go to the theater, you went to the town, and the town became the set, and the performance moved through the town, and your attention got drawn here and there by these, you know, scaled up, you know, features, you know, somebody up on the roof doing something, a sound coming from an unexpected direction, you know, or whatever. So I think maybe there's a lot more magic that we could accomplish by taking theater skills and knowledge out into locations. Like imagine doing a serial thing in Old Town where you could lead an audience through Eureka from place to place and tell a really interesting narrative, maybe about the whatever Chinese event, the history of the Chinese, or, you know, as it maybe that's too specific and documentary style. But it feels like media people tend to either go copy other styles, right? News, documentary. So much of our work is just documenting talking heads. You know, it's incredibly boring. Just the notion of applying storytelling skills and art to the media is so underdone in the world. I just want to encourage that thinking. You know, I was imagining, I happen to live in Eureka and spend time walking around Sequoia Park, and I thought, gee, imagine if a, you know, Synapsis Dell'Arte collaborative did a series of, you know, walked me through the park and showed me a bunch of different sets. You could probably tell me a really interesting story in my walk around the park. And how different that would be a combination of, anyway, the last thought there was, it's possible that all the different adaptations that theater people have had to do to technology and their frustration and bad experience with it, like Cleo's creative adaptation, you know, maybe there are other really interesting, cool things we could do, like we could do a live show with every theater space in Humboldt County linked together, taking turns off a script, doing some kind of interesting storytelling, multi-site, live, interactive storytelling. You know, use the technology, not in its own way, but adapt the technology into the theater space. Anyway, we're looking at hybridized spaces, like theaters that weren't having audiences at all, that went totally virtual. Coming back to, well, some of our audience is not here. So maybe it's a hybrid style of event, right? Maybe there's a virtual aspect with large screens or projections of things that are interactive. Anyway, I just thought I'd share some of that brainstorming with you.
I just want to share, like, talk about something, you know, you said meta improv, you know, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting stuff. That's a really cool idea, right? And something that we really focus on, this is kind of getting back to the original part of the conversation, which is like acting, right? And something that we talk about is seeing and being seen as a really important part of the process. And this sort of thing you're saying, the term you coined of meta improv, which I would just call living, right? Which is, it's what we do, right? All the time. I'm making it up. Right now I'm making it up. This isn't prepared. I haven't prepared any of this, right? But that's the whole point, is that's what's exciting about life, is that we are seeing each other and being seen and having that relationship. And so within the performative sphere, sometimes I think this is something that we train in, specifically, you know, at Dell'Arte and our work, is that we train to deal with what's actually happening. So a lot of times within a recorded thing, something will go wrong, and then the people on stage just like really wish it hadn't, and they'll completely ignore it. And then you'll see that hat that was sitting on stage for the rest of the show, and everyone's losing their mind because they're like, oh my God, that hat. And then when the person comes on and deals with the hat, the entire audience loses their mind because, oh my God, somebody did something real. Thank God, right? And that is the skill to cultivate. That's actually a skill you can cultivate all the time in your life, is you can just actually see and respond. And that's what we do anyway, but bringing that, having that awareness and bringing that into a character or into a work is a really exciting space. And that's what makes live theater so cool. So that you made me think of that when you said meta improv. It's super rad.
Yeah.
Tucker, you want to give us a last question, or, oh, sorry, Cleo, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, we just performed this clown show at the Badawatt Festival that the three of us and one of our other collaborators, Catherine Caesars, created. And in the piece, we have these bananas that we're using as guns. And at one point, I jump into these guys' arms, and we in all of rehearsal, the bananas had never fallen out of my pocket. In the show, the bananas flew across the stage. So now we had to handle it. Well, these guys are handcuffed, so I shoved them in jail. And literally the only response I had was to pick them up and go pew pew. And the audience went crazy because we had to deal with them, or else these bananas were going to be laying on stage at the time. And that's a promise that we cannot keep.
I want to just give you this recommendation, y'all. If you haven't read this book, maybe you can see it. It's called Free Play by Stephen Nachmanovich, and he is a violinist. He's a concert violinist. And maybe I'll write it in the chat too, because that was quick. And it's about improvisation and his experience with it, and what it's, the full title is Free Play: The Power of Improvisation in Life and the Arts. And it's awesome. I've read it a couple times. But the thing is always happening. We still have to make theater and entertain folks. And maybe I shouldn't say theater, because when we move into the internet, it may change into a different thing, but people still want to hear stories. And so we want to tell stories. So as artists figuring out what to do in this moment, my focus is, how do I tell stories? Because the medium may change, I'll learn the medium. I'll learn how to use the lens. I'll street perform. I'll figure out how to do some of it in person. I want to tell the story. What is the story? That's the thing to focus on, because then it's like, well, am I doing theater? I don't know. I don't know. But am I doing live things that I want to do? Yes. Am I telling a story? Yes. Are people connecting to it? Yes. Okay. They can name it whatever form they're going to name it. We can call it whatever we're going to call it. That way we don't have to compare. We can, when we compare as a means of understanding the different forms we're doing, not as a, it has to be right or wrong. It's just like, okay, that didn't work. That didn't work. We're in a different form. Let's do something different because we're in a different form. So yeah. And then finally, Tucker, you raised your hand. Yeah.
I didn't want you to we need to get back.
I don't want to go over you. So please.
We can't hear you, Tucker.
I know I hadn't said anything yet. I was just nodding like, yeah. I feel like most of what I was going to say got covered. But when I was working at Dell'Arte, they sent me to a disaster preparedness training. And what was interesting about it is they were saying that in times of disaster and loss, art is where humanity is actually kept. It's where culture is actually held. And that if we aren't actively working on preservation of the craft itself and all the materials we've crafted, that humanity will be lost. And I mean, going back to Melodrama, like all of humanity will be lost. And Sean, I think I met you there actually. And so this idea of adaptation, the combination of two things: acceptance, that we quickly accept that it's not coming back like it was for a very long time. And the sooner we can accept that, the quicker I think we can adapt. And I think kind of what Izzy, was talking about, all the technical problems, and with Club Triangle, it has been prohibitive, our technical problems. And so what we're working on now is trying to create something, and Sean talked about this a little bit, but something so completely different that is not even related to what we had been doing before in any, in some ways. But the idea would be to really be bringing all kinds of different art forms together in ways that they haven't come together before, in order to craft, just like sound and picture had to come together as two different things to make, talking pictures. I think that right now it's really important to start being inspired toward our adaptation for the sake of humanity.
Absolutely.
Or stick to your guns and make theater on the other side of the spectrum there. Get people off of the internet that will rot our brains, and off of social media, so that way we can live authentically in relationship to each other. Both.
I would say I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, both. Of the spectrum of making humanity better. That's the vibe.
Awesome. Well, we've come to the end of our time. That was such an amazing discussion. Thank you three for all of that. I feel like we could talk for hours about this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if you guys want to be in touch at all, I don't know if you guys are willing to put like your email in the chat.
We have some websites and stuff that we can put in so people
Oh,
can
yeah.
follow us. And
Yeah, so we were discussing this before, but currently we have individual artist websites, and I have a professional theater Instagram account, theater and dance Instagram account. And we just wanted to tell you all, we'll put them in the chat, but keep an eye out for more company stuff. We're going to be putting company pages together and performing in Humboldt County and hopefully all over the world pretty soon. So keep eyes out for new accounts is what we're saying.
Good.
Awesome. Super
Awesome.
cool. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
thanks
Peace.
all so
Bye
much.
for y'all.
Bye.
Adios.